Welcome to the EPG Pathshala. I am Dolika Jyoti Sharma, an assistant professor in English at Guwahati University. The module we are doing today is My Days by R.K Narayan, which is in the Indian Writing in English course. Rashipuram Krishnaswamy Narayan Swamy, commonly known as R.K Narayan, is one of the most extensively read Indian writers in English. The subject matter of his writings includes the small incidents and happenings that he witnessed in real life, which is to say that everyday life becomes the subject matter for R.K Narayan. He was a contemporary of novelists Mulk Raj Anand and Raja Rao, who were also known for their important fictional works. Apart from the novels, Narayan wrote many short stories, articles, sketches, essays, and travel books throughout his career as a writer. All of his novels, except a single novella, The Grandmother's Tale, published in 1993, are set in an imaginary town called Malgudi. Many of his short stories are written with Malgudi in their backdrop. Though the town existed only through his words, it created such an effect that the readers felt it to be real. Narayan's comment about this was that if it's a real town, it's a nuisance for a writer, because he thought that people would tend to find inexactness in it. As it was an imaginary one, it could fit in everywhere. The 14 novels he wrote depict the simple life of the people of Malgudi, its politics and absurdity, with all kinds of changes that actually take place in the town. Swamy and Friends, published in 1935, The Financial Expert in 1952, The Guide in 1958, Waiting for the Mahatma 1955, Mr. Sampath, The Printer of Malgudi, published in 1949, The Man-Eater of Malgudi, published in 1961, The Vendor of Sweets, 1967, and all the rest of the Malgudi novels explore different issues related to the Indian context, and specifically to the South Indian urban and semi-urban life, where life is portrayed in terms of colonialism, socio-political and familial issues put forward in a very subtle way by Narayan. He, being a witness to life under British rule in India, had come across all the changes in the educational system, administration, railways, and so on, which are all manifested in his novels. Narayan viewed both the new and the old India, the transitional period, aptly embodied in his writings quite often. His stories were serialized in television, which became very popular, and his novel, The Guide, which was published in 1958, was adapted as a film as well. The tradition of writing autobiographies and memoirs in English can be said to have begun with some of the notable figures such as Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Kashi Prasad Ghosh, who inspired Mahatma Gandhi, Lajpat Rai, and Jawaharlal Nehru to write theirs. But the autobiography of Latullah, a Mohammedan and his transactions with fellow preachers, published in 1857, is considered to be the first one written in English. The basic difference between a memoir and an autobiography is that the former is autobiographical in nature, which emphasizes on the author's self in the process of development, while the latter deals with the events, people, and experiences that mold the personality of that person. To name a few more personalities who have remarkably contributed in shaping the modern Indian history and who wrote their life stories are Bipin Chandra Pal, Subhash Chandra Bose, and S. Radhakrishnan. The literary figures such as Dom Moraes, N. Singh Chaudhary, and Mulk Raj Anand too have written their autobiographies. In Ranga Rao's words, the memoir of R.K Narayan, My Days, is the story of Narayan's nurture. This memoir presents the archetypal story of a self-launched artist We are privileged to witness here the making of an Indian novel in English, unquote. My Days acquaints the readers with Narayan's boyhood, his journey as a writer, and the trauma he underwent after he lost his wife early in life. It also reveals the circumstances revolving around the creation of his novels. Narayan begins his memoir by recalling his childhood. He spent most of his childhood under the care of his maternal grandmother in Madras, as he had many siblings and so his mother could not take care of all her children. His time was spent mostly with his pets, perhaps for the reason that he was a lonely child who occasionally had the company of his uncle. He remembers his uncle, who was a college student then, preoccupied with photography and drama. As a student, Narayan did not show much proficiency at school, but at home he was compelled to do lessons on the ragas, Sanskrit shlokas, Tamil and multiplication by his grandmother. His exposure to the dual world of religion, Christianity at school and Hinduism as a Hindu, Brahmin at home, and left an indelible mark in his young mind. The city of Madras, the active life of his grandmother, his fears and everything else he came across are recorded in his memoirs. Though Narayan was a quiet, dreamy and shy as a child, he had a very observant nature. All these experiences of his boyhood later inspired him to create the character of Swami for his first novel, Swami and Friends. His mischief as a child, freaking out with his gang of friends in the summer breaks during his school days in Madras, finds expression in his fiction. Another activity which had a great impact on Narayan's writing career is reading. He became an avid reader since a very young age. In fact, this characterizes most of all the greatest writers that we find. Almost all the greatest writers have always had interest in reading. They have a wide range of reading which has actually enriched the novels or whatever they chose as their particular field of writing. So Narayan also had the privilege of accessing books from the library of the school, where his father was a teacher. He was immensely influenced by the views of Rabindranath Tagore on education and Rabindranath Tagore's poetry. His reading included world classics and fictions with tragic ending. It's important because many of his novels have this underlying note of sadness, which might be explained by his interest in reading tragedy. In My Days, Narayan tells us about all the ups and downs of his writing career. He was discouraged by many, calling it unwise to consider writing as a means of earning. We have also to remember that at that point of time, writing was not as much regarded with respect as it is now. It was seen as not very important profession. In fact, it was not seen as a profession at all. Which is why Narayan taking up writing as a profession was in a way very new for his age. But Narayan was determined and his writing career began. Of course, it did not begin very smoothly. His father thought it to be a waste of time to spend on the huge typewriter which Narayan used for typing. Narayan then moved to Bangalore as his grandmother was there to recuperate from her illness. There, he embarked on his journey as a writer, and the raw material for his writing was the life itself. He wrote from his own life, he wrote from the lives he saw about other people around him. He drew his inspiration from the mundane and transformed it into something extraordinarily real in his readers' minds. The idea that he formed over the years in terms of people he observed, situations that came his way, were finally woven into the stories he wrote, almost all of them set in Malgudi. Narayan did not wish to provide any kind of moral lessons to his readers. He wanted to provide just an example of ethical life in these novels. He wrote, quote, mostly under the influence of events occurring around, unquote, him, which means that he did not provide a rigid moral or ethical framework for his writings. The readers were invited to participate in creating moral or ethical meanings from the novels. Writing for Narayan was also a gradual process. Once, when his father's best friend passed away, he wrote a poetic prose piece on friendship. Then he composed divine music. He sent the manuscripts to London and would wait for the postman to arrive, but it was not as easy as it appeared to him initially. Publishing was a huge labor at the time. Narayan had to face several rejections from many publishers of London, with which he became habituated in a little while. But he kept, quote, hoping for a warm letter or a check to fall out, but a neatly printed rejection slip was pinned to the manuscript, unquote. He still did not give up and remained persistent. At the time of publishing his first novel, Swami and Friends, he faced a similar experience. It was difficult for a struggling writer to get his work published. He had a similar experience, as has been stated earlier, at the time of publishing his first novel, Swami and Friends. His friend Purna, who went to Oxford later, produced the manuscript to Graham Greene. And Graham Greene was a very famous novelist at that time. Since then onwards, the literary friendship of Narayan and Greene began, and the latter became instrumental in the publication of a number of Narayan's works. A lot of many other facets of Narayan's life are revealed through his memoir. His looking for love, for example, friendship, relations with his wife, daughter, and other members of the family, his views on religion, education, and so on. The fact that he hailed from a typical, uncomplicated South Indian joint family, where everyone lives in the same house in sheer harmony, acted as the foundation for Narayan's writing. Everything seems to have been the raw materials for his writing. Narayan once remarked, quote, to be a good writer anywhere, you must have roots, both in religion and in family. I have these things, unquote. Even in his personal life, it is due to the support of his family that he could raise his motherless daughter without any difficulty. In every crisis, the family was together, and his marital life too never encountered any conflict. His marriage to Rajam seems to be a plot of a novel, as he fell in love with her, seeing her drawing water from a tap in the street. He pursued his love and married Rajam at the same time when marriages were mostly arranged, and that too against the astrological prediction that he would become a young widower if he tied the nuptial knot with her. Regarding religion and education, Narayan opines that, quote, next to religion, education was the most compulsive force in a family like ours, unquote. As an orthodox Hindu, Narayan believed in Hindu philosophy, which calls for carrying on with the life role assigned to every human being. In terms of education, he was entirely against the examination system, with its, quote, unwarranted seriousness and esoteric suggestions, unquote. Even after many years, his views on education still remain the same, such as in, quote, school, college, lectures and examination were never things that Narayan either enjoyed or excelled at, unquote. Memory and trauma play integral parts in my days. Narayan's novel, The English Teacher, published in 1945, is replete with the memories of his dead wife. His wife Rajam died of typhoid in 1939. He shared an incredibly wonderful relation with his wife, and so he always remembered her fondly. He loved his wife dearly and remained faithful to her even after her death. When they got married, Rajam was very young, but she could manage her household duties quite efficiently. She got along well with all the members of Narayan's family. She also had been much practical in her approach towards life. At that time, Narayan was scripting The Dark Room, which was to be published in 1938, with his heroine Savitri as the central character. It's interesting also to see that Savitri is one of the sati figures in India, and I suppose Narayan also viewed his wife in terms of that Savitri, in terms of that all devoted wife. Now, after his wife's death, Narayan went into a severe bout of depression. He never remarried, though he had been advised by many to remarry. So badly was he affected by her death that it took him 6 years to return to writing. While he was going through that crucial period, on the suggestion of a friend, he took psychic help to cope with it, and after a lot of practice, he could communicate with his dead wife. It actually helped him tremendously to get himself out of the traumatic experience and move on with his life. At this juncture, he was encouraged by Graham Greene and Dr. Paul Brunton, who told him, quote, "You will write a book which is within you already now, and it is bound to come out sooner or later when you give yourself a chance to write," unquote. After a lot of practice, quote unquote, psychic experience became a regular part of his life. He could communicate with his dead wife with the help of this process. Narayan began to feel Rajan's presence all around him during these sessions. It actually helped him tremendously to get himself out of his traumatic experience and move on with his life. Since then, another aspect of his personality evolved which carried him forward then onwards. It thus resulted in his maturity as a writer. These entire experiences of Narayan's own life echo in the highly autobiographical novel, The English Teacher. Soon after, he started publishing his own journal, Indian Thought, but it did not last long as Narayan himself was never very satisfied with it. Another incident in Mysore provided him with the setting of his novel, The Guide. It was during a severe drought, a prayer for rain was organized by the municipal council at that point of time, which lasted for 11 days, and it rained on the 12th day. It was as if the prayers were answered. At a later period, while he was traveling in America, this idea developed and took shape of the novel which has become subsequently very popular. Narayan mentions in his memoir about the actor and producer Devanand, who played the lead role in the novel, in the film. On reading his memoir, it becomes comprehensible that Narayan was the product of the society he belonged to, as V.S. Naipaul opines that Narayan, quote, operates from deep within his society, unquote. It seems to be evident from the fact that Narayan chiefly wrote about the middle classes to which he himself belonged to. He portrayed it with all its flavor, happiness, sorrows, tears and smiles, which is also reflected in his fictional world. He was criticized for not having written about the poor classes of people, particularly the peasants. But then at the same time, it can be justified by saying that Narayan wrote about what his experiences were, so that it gives at times a greater authenticity to his writing. Narayan's voyage of life as a whole entailed various hardships. There were a lot of compromises that he had to make in order to sustain his life and sustain the tempo of his life. It was the period when Narayan was struggling to take up a profession when his father was retired, and, quote, all sorts of readjustments, unquote, had to be made. They could not afford a big house like the one they were living before due to the scarcity of funds, especially the scanty pension of his father. For Narayan, it was a shift from his comfort zone, where he had dreamt and imagined that would facilitate his writing. After his marriage, in order to have a steady income, He even had to work as a reporter in a newspaper called The Justice. This was because writing was not a viable profession at that point of time. It never guaranteed any economic security, which is why a backup option, a profession, was really needed. So Narayan had to write for many other publications against his wish. All he wanted to do was to write himself. So he had to write for other publications, much against his wish, and taste only to earn a little money. Financial constraints were always there, and his father's demise aggravated the situation. Narayan's family lived in a rented house as his father did not seem to have afforded a house of his own. They could not afford a house of their own, which is why they had to live in a rented house. It was difficult, it was increasingly becoming difficult to accommodate this family which was being extended with the passage of time. And especially with the limited income of Narayan and his brothers, it was hard to meet the soaring rents of big houses. Later on, even when he had his own house, he lived with his family in the rented house, using the new one as his writing retreat. My Days elucidates the storyteller Narayan's life as a mixed bag, seasoned with different flavors. Something which is strikingly noticeable all throughout his memoir is that he made the utmost use of everything that came his way. Success did not come easily to him, as his early novels did not receive much commercial success. But he began to be noticed by contemporary writers like Somerset Maugham and E.M. Forster. A long-lasting friendship had already been established with Graham Greene, and the spiritual relation was made with Paul Brunkman. When Maugham visited Mysore in 1938, he wanted to meet Narayan. But ironically, no one in Mysore knew who the writer Narayan was, and so the meeting did not take place. In his personal front also, the demise of his wife was a massive setback. However, after much effort, he was rejuvenated, and it became a turning point for him. His erstwhile avoidance of the tough old classics and Tamil literature might have remained at the back of his mind, and he got interested on those, however, in the later period. In the year 1968, he was fascinated by Kamban and wrote a prose narrative on the Ramayana and translated the Mahabharata. His works began to be published in America in the year 1953. In the concluding chapters of the memoir, Narayan talks about his non-literary interests, armchair agriculture, which he found to be extremely engrossing. Unfortunately, he realized that agriculture did not prove to be a very profitable venture for him. He wrote letters to the newspapers about, quote, corruption and inefficiency, unquote, of the administration, and endeavored to save the trees of Mysore. So, unlike his image in the fiction, in his fiction, where he comes across as this writer who is so concerned, preoccupied with writing, in his memoirs, we come across R.K. Narayan also engaging with some kind of activism too. R.K. Narayan was conferred many awards, including the Sahitya Akademi Award in 1961, the Padma Bhushan in 1964, and the Padma Vibhushan in 2000, and honorary degrees by various universities. In the year 1989, he was appointed as the member of the Rajya Sabha, the upper house of the Indian Parliament. In the year 2001, he took his last breath, bidding adieu to all his reader fans and providing a strong base for the contemporary Indian writers writing in English. To sum up, R.K. Narayan's My Days provides, as I have mentioned earlier, provides a slightly wider range on the writer R.K. Narayan. R.K. Narayan, who is known more for his fiction, comes across in My Days as someone who also is very politically conscious, although that political consciousness is not very overt in his fiction. At the same time, however, R.K. Narayan does not really provide a moral about his life in My Days. My Days is a memoir that presents Narayan's own life as an example of a trajectory of the development of himself. It is not prescriptive in the sense that he doesn't provide his own life as a model that others should follow. From his memoirs, however, we come across certain facets of R.K. Narayan's life, which, however, has to do with the ethical life, the ethical world around him. For example, he's growing up in a joint family. For example, the circumstances of his meeting his wife, the very unconventional manner of his marriage, and his lifelong devotion to his wife and hers to him. So these aspects of My Days thereby present Narayan as a person whom we can relate with rather than as merely a writer. At the same time, however, since Narayan is consciously presenting himself as the subject of his memoirs, there is also the aspect that is frequently associated with the idea of writing lives or the idea of life writing. It is also a very considered construction of Narayan's self, because after all, it is a going back to his life and recreating his life, as it were, from the very beginning. My Days, therefore, presents both an autobiographical picture. It is an autobiography of sorts, a memoir, but at the same time, it is uniquely Indian in the value system or the system of values or the worldview that underpins this text. In My Days, again, we find Narayan emphasizing the supreme importance of imagination and memory, all right, in his writings. He talks about how his memories of his wife or how his memories of his growing up contributes to say the Malgudi that we come across in his novels, or the characters Swami and Friends. For example, Swami in Swami and Friends, he is a very mischievous character, and this very personality of Swami is something that we can actually relate to the mischief that Narayan himself did as a child, although one is in the real life, as it were, and the other is fiction. The characters themselves are in Narayan's novels are, of course, cannot be taken as autobiographical in nature. They are characters, after all, in fiction. But at the same time, his fiction is something that has deeply embedded all these experiences and opinions of R.K. Narayan. My Days, therefore, provides in a way a bridge between R.K. Narayan, the writer, and R.K. Narayan, the person. Although the two are not one and the same, but through a reading of My Days, we can in a way bring the writer and the person into a certain kind of dialogue with one another.